Hello photographers, now that you know how to set up your flash gear, I'm going to show you how to use it. But before we even turn the flash on, we first have to talk about the light. See, when you're working with flash, you're automatically working with two different light sources. One light source is the flash itself, and the other light source is the ambient light. And when you're working with two different light sources, you need to know how to control each light source so that you can control how your final photo actually looks. We're going to start with the ambient light because that's the kind of light that you're already used to working with. The ambient light is whatever light already exists in the scene you're shooting in. For example, here in my studio, the ambient light is created by my studio ceiling lights. Whatever the scene you're in, the ambient light is a continuous light source. What this means is that when you take a photo, for as long as the shutter is open, the ambient light continuously strikes the camera sensor to be recorded for the photo. And you already know how to control your ambient exposure by changing your ISO, aperture, and/or your shutter speed settings. Changing any or all of those settings will make the ambient light exposure brighter or darker. Your second light source then is the flash itself, and the flash is an instantaneous light source. See, your flash fires a very brief and intense burst of light, and that burst typically lasts around 1/5000th to 1/10,000th of a second. So with a flash, when you take a photo, the shutter might be open for 1/60th of a second, but the light from the flash only hits the camera sensor for that instantaneous moment of 1/10,000th of a second. After the flash fires, for the rest of that 1/60th of a second, the only light that strikes the sensor is the ambient light. Now, what I'm about to say is important, so take note. Because what all of this means is that changing the shutter speed has no impact on how bright the flash will be in your photo. Think about it for a second. If the flash fires for 1/10,000th of a second, it doesn't matter if the shutter speed is 1/60th of a second or 1/200th of a second, because the flash only fires for that very brief instant, and then for the rest of the shutter duration, all you're recording is the ambient light. So the shutter speed has no impact on the flash exposure, but you can change the flash exposure by changing your ISO or your aperture. And if you think about this, it makes perfect sense. Shutter speed does not change the flash exposure because the shutter speed controls the time of the exposure. And any shutter speed you use will be much longer than the actual flash duration. But if you change your ISO, you change the camera's sensitivity to all light that hits the camera sensor, including light that comes from your flash. And if you change the aperture, you change how much light is able to pass through the lens, and that includes light from the flash because the light from the flash has to pass through the lens to get into the camera. The tricky thing about using your ISO or your aperture to control your flash exposure is that it also controls your ambient exposure. So if you make an adjustment to your ISO or your aperture, both the flash exposure and the ambient exposure will change. As a result, I find it much easier to control my flash exposure by changing the flash power. And depending on the flash you have, you'll be able to change the flash power in either full stop increments or 1/3 stop increments. So if you turn up the power, the flash will put out more light, making the photo brighter, and if you turn down the flash power, it will put out less light, making the photo darker. And you can do this without making any changes to your ambient exposure. This is the beauty of flash photography because it gives you control over your light, and if you know how to control your light, you can control exactly how your photo will look. But working with flash also complicates things because you have to know what you want your photo to look like and how you're going to use your light sources to make it look that way, which is exactly what I'm going to show you in the next video. In the meantime, if you want to learn more, check out my Understanding Flash Photography video course, which goes into more depth on what we covered today, and it covers everything you need to know to get you taking amazing flash photos in no time at all. It's a really great course. It can really help you get going really fast. So if you want to learn more about it, click this link below or visit selfhelpphotographer.com/understandingflash. And if you have any questions about what we covered today or anything else about flash photography, just let me know down in the comments. And then do me a favor, would you like this video and subscribe to my channel? If you really like this video, please share it with your friends. But the most important thing you need to do is get out there and take some damn photos. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the Photoblab live show, which goes into more depth on